Sensei Richard Stone, a black belt, challenged Arthur Hayes, a janitor, to spar for fun. What happened next stunned everyone in the martial arts gym. "Hey, you there cleaning? How about a quick demonstration?" Richard from the center of the mat, his black belt shining. "I bet you've never seen a real fight, right?" Arthur stopped mopping and slowly looked up. At 42, he'd been cleaning the gym for only 3 weeks, usually after hours. But tonight, the advanced class ran late. "I don't want to bother you, Sensei," Arthur calmly replied, going back to a stubborn stain. "Just finishing up so you can get back to it?" Richard let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Everyone, look at this! The guy's afraid to even step on the mat?" The 8 students chuckled nervously, some clearly uncomfortable. Richard didn't know that Arthur had spent 20 years trying to forget who he really was. 20 years since leaving the fighting ring after a life-changing accident. 20 years keeping a secret even his teenage daughter didn't know. "Come on, man," Richard continued, approaching with his usual arrogant smile. "Just a little demo. I bet you don't even know a basic guard. How about showing my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans?" Arthur felt a familiar feeling in his chest, like an old muscle waking up. His eyes met Richard's briefly, and for a split second something passed between them that made Richard step back. "Just an educational demonstration," Richard insisted, trying to hide his sudden uncertainty. "Nothing serious, just to show beginners why it's important to respect martial arts." Arthur put the bucket down and slowly stood up. His movements were surprisingly smooth for someone supposedly new to a mat. Around the gym, students stopped training, sensing something was about to happen. "All right," Arthur finally said, his voice calm like a lake before a storm. "But when we're done, you're going to apologize to all of them for turning this mat into a circus." Richard, Cook, laughed, but it sounded forced this time. "Apologize, man. You'll be apologizing to the floor when you meet it." None of them knew that Arthur Hayes had once been Arthur Ironclad Hayes, a 5-time world mixed martial arts champion. He had retired at his peak after an accident that cost his best friend and training partner Leo, the Crusher Martinez, his life. Since then, Arthur had sworn never to fight again. But some promises are broken when dignity is on the line. Richard adjusted his black belt with a dramatic flair, enjoying the attention. "Everyone gather around. You're about to see a lesson worth more than 6 months of training." Click. The difference between those who dedicate their lives to martial arts and those who just clean the floor where real fighters walk. Arthur stood still in the center of the mat, but his breathing had changed. His eyes closed briefly, and for a moment he wasn't in that gym in Denver. He was back at the National Gymnasium in Las Vegas 22 years ago, hearing similar insults before his world title fight. "Look at that little long-haired guy. I bet he won't last 3 rounds against a real fighter," someone had yelled. Arthur had won by knockout in the 2nd round, but the victory came at a heavy price. The pressure from the racist comments had made him lose control during a sparring session, leading to Leo's accidental death. "So, Janitor," Richard sneered, circling Arthur like a predator. "How about showing my students how not to do a basic guard? Or is that too complicated for someone who only knows how to push a mop?" That's when Maya Lin couldn't stay quiet. The 22-year-old jiu-jitsu purple belt and psychology student had been studying sports discrimination. What she saw was deeply unsettling. "Sensei Richard," she began timidly. "Excuse me, Maya, but who's teaching here?" "You are," she replied. "But that shouldn't include racial humiliation disguised as a technical demonstration." Several students exchanged nervous glances. No one had ever challenged Richard like this. Richard's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "Racial? Haha," Richard forced a laugh. "This has nothing to do with race. It's about respect for martial arts and knowing your place." Arthur slowly opened his eyes. There was something in Maya's words, her courage against authority, that reminded him of his younger sister Chloe. She had the same determination, the same refusal to silently accept unfairness. Chloe had died at 17, a victim of a stray bullet during a police confrontation. Arthur was fighting in Japan when he got the news. Another loved one lost while he chased glory far away. Another reason to give it all up and disappear into an ordinary life. Maya, Richard said in a dangerously low voice. If you can't respect my teaching methods, maybe you should find another gym. There are places more suited to people with your mindset. The threat hung heavy in the air. Maya felt a chill, but stood firm. My tuition is paid, Sensei, and I believe everyone here deserves a learning environment based on mutual respect, not humiliation. That's when Arthur did something unexpected. He started to smile. It wasn't a nervous or weak smile. It was the slow, deliberate smile of someone who had just found a reason to stop hiding. Richard, Arthur finally said, his voice quiet but full of authority, making everyone turn to him. The young lady is right. This isn't about martial arts. It's about you trying to feel important by putting others down. Richard spun around, his face red with anger. How dare you lecture me about martial arts? You don't even know what a dojo is. Arthur stepped forward, and his posture fundamentally changed. His shoulders straightened, his balance subtly shifted lower, and his feet moved into a perfect fighter's stance. Actually, Arthur said calmly, I know exactly what a dojo is, and I know that this place stopped being one a long time ago. Richard felt an unexplained chill. There was something about how Arthur moved now, how he filled the space that triggered his self-preservation instincts. But his wounded pride wouldn't let him back down. Enough talk, Richard growled, taking his fighting stance. I'll teach you respect the hard way. Maya watched with growing worry, but also professional interest. She'd studied hundreds of hours of fights for her research, and Arthur's movements reminded her of legendary masters from old videos. The efficient movements, controlled breathing, the calm presence that radiated contained power. Arthur closed his eyes briefly, letting 22 years of muscle memory return to her, to your students, and to turn this place back into a learning space. Richard laughed, but it was nervous and forced. Apologize, man. You'll be begging for forgiveness when you're on the floor. Richard couldn't see that Arthur had already spotted all his weaknesses. The high guard leaving his body open, his habit of retreating with his right leg first, and how his shoulder movements gave away his punches. 22 years away hadn't erased decades of precise technical analysis. Maya noticed other students instinctively backing away, like wild animals sensing a coming storm. The gym's energy had completely shifted, as if the air was charged before lightning. When everyone laughed at Richard's last taunts, something unexpected appeared in Arthur's expression. Not anger or revenge, but the calm determination of someone who had found a reason to break a 20-year vow of silence. Some of those present began to realize that something amazing was about to happen. Richard remained in his aggressive stance, typical of someone trained in controlled settings against predictable opponents. Arthur stood still for a few seconds, just watching. His eyes scanned Richard from head to toe, automatically noting every detail. The high guard exposing his ribs, his unstable balance, the tense shoulders that telegraphed every move. Still waiting? Richard sneered, bouncing slightly on his feet. Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost? Richard's public humiliation was a swift and brutal lesson. The viral video of Arthur's controlled power versus Richard's panicked aggression left his dojo empty and his pride in ruins. Forced to teach a small class in a humble community gym, Richard found himself in a silence he hadn't experienced in years. He watched from a distance as Arthur, now an instructor, taught his former students not just techniques, but philosophy and respect. A deep, aching regret began to overshadow his jealousy. One day he saw Maya struggling with groceries. Instead of turning away, he walked over and offered to help. I'm sorry, he confessed, acknowledging his past arrogance. At her doorstep, he thanked her for showing him that true strength isn't about being the best fighter, but about being the better person. As he walked away, Maya knew his change was real. The humiliation hadn't destroyed him. It had finally humbled him, putting him on the path of true strength.